In Focus. In this last session, we are joined by Mr. Willliam Kipongi, a research assistant with the Building Safer Communities Research Program at the PNG National Research Institute. He has undertaken research and published various papers on sorcery accusations related violence. Mr. Willliam Kipongi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Firstly, Mr. Kipongi, can you give us a context of the types of individuals accused of sorcery and where and by whom?
Thank you. To give a context of answering that question, in Papua New Guinea, when you look at the accused population, it varies from different cultures, different backgrounds, different social settings. Where when you look at Bougainville and parts of the coastal regions, there are a lot of men accused. And when you look at the highlands context, there's a lot of women being accused. And then in between, there's a lot of emerging children who have been accused as primary as well as the secondary victims of sorcery. So there is a possibility that men is accused, women are accused, both elderly and middle-aged people. So there is no exception for anybody being not accused. But we cannot actually figure out certain characteristics that really gives people the mandate or give people the conviction that these are particular people who are practicing sorcery. But it's the aspect of accusation, it's just people picking up someone and they just started accusing it. So there is possibility of men, women, children being accused of sorcery.
Given that there is a certain degree of cultural and traditional element to it, how has this belief system changed over time?
In the past, it was the accusation and sorcery belief was more common in the coastal areas. But in some parts of islands, they do have that sort of belief. But when we look at now, there is this changing narratives moving from one region to the other through intermarriages, through trades and other business opportunities. And when you look at now in the highlands, there's a lot of violence associated with sorcery and witchcraft practices. So in that context, there's a lot of people being accused and killed and tortured in the islands. And now slowly you can see that in the coastal people, there's also torture going on. If you can read the newspaper last year, there was an elderly woman tortured in Gulf province, accused of eating someone's heart, which was never been a practice in the Gulf province. And then in the West New Britain, there was an elderly man been tortured and burned. So now we can see that there's these narratives moving from the coast up to the islands, and people are getting accused. And then the people in the coast seeing the violence is very ripe in the highlands, trying to torture and kill those accused. And then the youths in the coastal, maybe they are picking up that is the right way to address this issue of sorcery. So this trend is moving from one region to another through narratives, and violence is now becoming prevalent in every provinces and every regions in Papua New Guinea.
Okay. It's a good segue into my next question, and it's that from your studies and research so far, what are the regulatory or legal avenues available to overcome sorcery accusations related violence?
I think our government has taken the right step and then amended some of the existing laws and in our constitution. Firstly, the government has amended the criminal law by adding provisions to criminalize all activities in sorcery. And then any activity that accompanies sorcery accusation or sorcery-related violence is criminalized. And now, recently in 2022, they have included provisions on the glassman. Whoever is claiming or pretending to be a diviner has to be prosecuted under that provision within the criminal law. So that law is already in place. And then government has come up with the Sorcery National Action Plan. So the first version has come to a completion in 2022. So now the government has come up with the second version of the National Action Plan that will be started in 2023 to 2027. And then the government has also established this permanent parliamentary committee, which has now taken on board the agenda of gender equality and women empowerment. So the sorcery aspect is also included in that. So there's a lot of legal activities government is pushing through to the different agencies to address the issue of sorcery. And those are the legal platforms that government has created, the laws, the policies, and also the secretariat has been created so that it can also connect with the CSOs and churches on the ground who's doing something in line with sorcery.
Based on your assessment, where do you think it can be further improved in terms of the context or conditions necessary for them to work effectively?
When we look at the context and to effectively address the issue, every agency has a responsibility as far as the National Action Plan is concerned. The education, people at the education level, has to start including some of this syllabus, some of this teaching curriculum that talks about SARV at the earliest level as far as the primary or the elementary is concerned. And they also have a responsibility to play a part of informing and influencing. And also the health department also has to do a lot of work around health awareness about lifestyle diseases, different sort of sicknesses killing people whom people are not aware of. And they started resolving through claiming it as a source of practices. And the law and order enforcement agencies like police, courts, they also have to effectively enforce those laws that the government has put up. So every agency has to do their part so that we can collectively address the issue. If we just leave one entity to do the work, it won't work. It's just imbalance. It cannot carry on. So one person has to do the part, or agency, and then the other one has to take on from that. So in collaboration and in networking, we can be able to condemn this issue of sorcery accusation related violence.
Yeah. I mean, based on the interviews I conducted with survivors and communities affected by SARV, there is a overwhelming call for the removing of powers of community courts to preside over SARV cases. They've opted for it to be moved to the district courts. Do you feel this is the right approach?
I personally don't feel that's the right approach because the formal courts like district courts are very, it's hard to access. It's rarely available to the people. Because when you look at the level of accusation and the level of the number of victims in the provinces, the only legal entity or agency there is the village courts. So the only way is to empower possible strategies or possible ways that the government has to come up with to empower the village courts. But if the village court is widespread, I mean the district court is widespread, and the people can easily access it, and then we can do away with some of these powers that the village courts are usually using it as in the community level. Because the village courts now, the community courts are doing is, what the accused people don't like when their cases are before the community court is that they don't see the individual who has been accused and tortured and carrying all that kind of pain and burden in them. When the community courts preside over a case in sorcery, they look at the community issues, community consent, instead of the individual rights and in the individual person's concerns and needs. So when they look at the community consents, they overlook the individual's needs. So that's when the victims feel that community court is not helping them. So they have to seek other means to the police and to the district courts. And that's why they are raising that complaint very rightfully, but district courts are very expensive. Some of them cannot afford it. So it's very rarely available to our people in the rural settings. Some provinces are even without district courts at the moment. So how can they access those legal steps to access justice? So it's a very narrow perspective, but I see that village courts are very potential legal institution where the people are, but they need a little bit of more support and empowerment.
How do you think the government can go about ensuring the impartiality of village courts to render justice in an equitable and justiciable way?
Through one of those village court trainings that we conducted all throughout the country, most of the islands provinces, they were not aware of the laws that are existing in Papua New Guinea, the policies that government has come up with, the powers that are given to the village courts. And some of these village courts are illiterate. So that's why most of the things that are the plans that the government come up with could not boil down to the village courts. So what we see as a need now is to continue having regular training with the village court magistrates, the village court clerks and registrars, so that they are well equipped with what's happening at the government level, the top level. So they also have to come down and assist the village courts so that they can render justice effectively to the people. And these village courts also have to work in collaboration with the police, because the issue of sorcery, it's not just two parties involved. It's a community against an individual person. So that's why village courts, they need a bit of empowerment, support from the police, from the government, and even the district court has to support and oversee what the village courts are doing, so that what they are doing can be effective, can be supportive to the survivors in the communities.
Now, Mr. Kipongi, based on another of your spotlight papers, you published, which was titled Possible Ways to Address Challenges Associated with Reintegration of Survivors of Sorcery Accusations Related Violence. You identified one of the key issues as being that the long-term displacement of people who have been accused. What did your research uncover in that aspect?
That research was widely conducted around the Highlands provinces. And I have actually interviewed about 150 survivors in the last 5 years, working in that space for almost 6 years. And most of the survivors were repatriated from the violent place that they have been accused and tortured. And then they were sent to health facilities, safe houses where they were taken care of. And they cannot take care of those people forever, so they have to bring them back to the communities. And when they were reintegrated back into their communities, they still feel that they're discriminated. They are reaccused in the condition that when someone else is sick, or when there is an accident, or anything happens, they are the possible person to be reaccused again. So having seen all that sort of things that going on, there was no effective sort of reintegration being done. So that's why I was doing that research, trying to find out what would be the possible ways or strategies that can be used by people on the front line who are reintegrating those survivors back into their communities. And in some provinces, especially in these urban communities, I interviewed a survivor in Goroka, in the urban center. And when she was reintegrated back into the community, the police was monitoring her situation regularly. The community leaders were following up on how she's doing, how she's living, and that makes or gives her the comfort that she's okay, she's satisfied. And that sort of reintegration was very effective. But in one of the remote places in Enga, a couple of them, 4 or 5 survivors were reintegrated back into their communities, and they were hiding in their own locked rooms. They cannot come out to participate in the social activities of the communities because people are watching, and they are giving directions where they should sit, what they should say. Even though they are reintegrated, so-called, brought them back into the villages, they are still accused. They are still marginalized. And that's why I was trying to see what are the possible factors that can effective or strengthen that sort of reintegration. And that's why when I look at the IPO, interim protection order, that village courts can issue to keep the violent husband away if the woman had been accused in the family. And that important aspect has to be considered when someone is being reintegrated. And also, the community, all parties who have been involved in the accusation has to be involved. And the police has to get involved, and the church leaders has to be involved, so that everybody has to witness that reintegration, so that the survivor feel that I am now back to my community. So these are the things, the elements that were missing, and those are some of the things that I encountered when reintegration is done using one of these particular strategies, maybe through only IPO, maybe through only the village courts, and leaving the police and other entities out, and that doesn't give a complete reintegration where the survivor feels at peace back in the community. Those are some of the things that I discovered in my studies.
Now, one of the major recommendations from your paper is the promoting of reconciliation, which has been recognized as very important in the implementation plan of the Sorcery National Action Plan 2016 to 2026. How can this process be undertaken?
I can quickly give a classical example on that. In one of the villages in Lufa, we started a reconciliation process in 2019. More than 20 to 30 families were displaced in relation to a sorcery accusation related violence. And we tried to use police and village court magistrate to bring those displaced communities back into the community, and it couldn't work. And then we tried to use police, that couldn't work. And then we tried to engage the church, and it couldn't work. But then we leave it to the community themselves to decide. And then the leaders themselves talked, and then they engaged the church leaders to host a church gathering for a week. And then they have a reconciliation service, a church service. And then at the end, the last week, they have to kill pig, host a party, and say sorry, and dispose their weapons. And then they were crying. And that was one of those solid reintegration. And in one part in Mendi, there was another reconciliation where community has to make feast, has to kill pigs, and then the two families has to come together, say sorry, hug each other. Perpetrator has to come forward and say sorry. And then the problem was gone. Even though when we tried to bring them through the police, through the courts, through the IPOs, but without the proper reconciliation, the element of the value of custom or cultural element in place with the reintegration aspects, then it's sort of like incomplete. The person is still feeling insecure in the community. When the person is reconciled back into the community where the violence erupted, then the survivors feel that we are okay, now we are back. So that's why the aspect of reconciliation, it could be through the churches or it could be through the cultural practices. Whatever the strategies that are now, it has to be reconciled. The two parties has to be reconciled somehow so that person has to feel secure back in the community. From the research, there are a lot of recommendations that I come up with, collecting from the perceptions of the key stakeholders, CSOs on the ground, the government agencies. This issue is a very serious issue that everyone needs to act upon. And particularly from the research, I want to recommend that people out there in the community, they really want to see police doing some prosecutions. The prosecutors and CIDs, it's my appeal to the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary that please, the CIDs has to do a very thorough investigation of the case, and the prosecution has to prosecute those perpetrators. When perpetrators are roaming around aimlessly, freely in the community, the people are still suppressed. Those CSOs, those frontline workers on the ground, they are still demoralized. They are doing their work, but they are suppressed because government has never taken over from what they have been doing. So my appeal and my humble request to the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary, please do some prosecutions and do some arrests so that our humble citizens has to see them and perpetrators has to learn from those and has to change their behaviors. Second recommendation, the health professionals in the field of your expertise. Lifestyle diseases, sicknesses, and death are the highest contributing factors where sub-talk is very ripe in the country. When someone is sick, when someone is dying, people are talking about sorcery. It's now up to the health personnel to please do awareness whenever and wherever you are. Tell the people that these are the kind of sicknesses that are killing people like this and that, so that the level of accusation can be reduced. If you compromise with your profession, with your cultural beliefs, I think you're not in the right place. I can honestly tell you. And secondly, to the education and the law enforcing agencies, please continue to communicate this issue so that we all can educate everyone so that this issue can be minimized and addressed to the extent that we want to see. And the other thing that I would like to appeal to the government, please let's provide free medical service for the survivors. When they are accused and tortured, they don't have time to look for money. They don't have time to look for resources. It's a community that accused and tortured this person. Can the government provide a free medical service for those accused of sorcery accusation related violence? And also, shall we have a free legal desk so that these people can be assisted, so that they can be given justice that they are crying for? And finally, the government is to provide the funding that those CSOs and frontline workers on the ground has to access to those funding so that they can respond to the issue immediately. And lastly, please, those who are on the ground, networking is very important. Work together with CSOs, with police, with village courts, with community leaders, and with your local MPs so that together we can help our people. Those are my humble recommendations and advice to the government, to the people, and to the communities.
We understand that some viewers may find the content distressing. If you feel triggered or need support, we encourage you to call the One Talk Counseling Helpline line on 7150-8000. The One Talk Counseling Helpline line is a free confidential phone counseling service providing information and support for anyone experiencing any forms of violence in PNG. Mr. Willliam Kipongi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my research findings.
Well, viewers, that's all the time we have for this 1-hour special edition of In Focus. Do join us again next week, Monday, on our regular time slot of 7 p.m. Till then, bye for now. This program is supported by the ABC International Development through the Media Development Initiative.
This program was proudly brought to you by Telecom Limited and Daytech.